So without further ado, let me introduce Jim Sampson. One of the great pleasures I have doing this series is getting to know in more depth people I've read about, met over years. Actually, Jim, I think, appointed me to the Library Commission many years ago. And so I knew him a little bit, but it's a remarkable life. So he was born in the Panama Canal Zone. A son of a military man, he moved around with his family quite a bit when he was younger. He's the oldest of 8 siblings. He earned an associate degree in police administration here at UAF and began working life with the Laborers Local 942. Governor Steve Cooper tapped him to serve as Commissioner of Labor. Grace Scheibel convinced him to run for borough mayor and agreed to be his campaign chair twice. Governor Tony Knowles appointed him to the Alaska Permanent Fund Board. In 2003, he took over the presidency of the AFL-CIO here in the state for 5 years, representing 50,000 union members statewide. After a short retirement, he began raising money for the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center and served as director until 2016. He remains engaged in his community to this day. Please join me in welcoming Jim Sampson. Now, Jim, your dad served during World War II and beyond. Tell me about his service and your early life.
Well, Dad, he was born in Sangerville, Maine. That's where my parents and grandparents come from. And when he graduated from high school in 1943, he joined the United States Army, and he was in the Philippines. He was in the 11th Airborne, paratrooper infantry, which they just reflagged here in Alaska a couple of weeks ago. So he served a couple of years in the Philippines, and then he came back to Maine, I think in '46, where he met my mother, who's from Lewiston, Maine. She was born in Pajepscot, Maine, and they got married, I think, in 1948, and he was working in the shipyards after the war, and he re-enlisted in the Army Air Corps. And he thought he was coming to Alaska. His father, my grandfather, was a game warden in Maine in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and with friends with Sam White, who was from Maine originally, who was a game warden up here. And my dad had a desire to come to Alaska, but they sent him to the Panama Canal Zone. And actually, I'm not the oldest of 8. I have an older sister, Debbie. And
she was born in the Panama?
Debbie was born in the Panama Canal Zone, and I was born in the Panama Canal Zone. And then he did get assigned to Alaska in 1952, so we spent 3 years here, and then we went back to Maine, and then we came back to Alaska in 57, 8, and 9. So that's, he retired a few years later, and he came back, and he actually worked on the DEW line. In the 60s, 65, I think, he was on the DEW line.
Well, I often hear with military families when they travel a bit, they really have to forge strong bonds. Was that true with your family?
I don't really know if that was true. I think it's tough for families, when their parents serve in the military to move from one location to another. We were young, so, I'm not sure it was a bonding thing, but, I do think it's the movement from, every 3 or 4 years, is, I think, hard on a family. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, the first time in Alaska was down at Elmendorf?
Elmendorf.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of that?
Not too much, to be honest with you. I remember going rabbit hunting at Chickaloon, but I don't really remember much. And to be honest with you, I don't remember a lot when we were here in the late 50s. I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and we lived on Badger Road. I remember hauling water, ice skating on the slough. I remember hula hooping for silver dollars at the North Star Bar, you know. I was 8 years old. I don't know if anybody remembers the North Star Bar in North Pole.
So was that your first paying gig?
That's my first paying gig. Yeah. There used to be a lot of silver dollars, you know, back in them days, you know,
Yeah.
in the 50s and 60s. You know, they didn't have paper dollars, they had silver dollars. But it's about all I remember, to be honest with you, in the 50s.
It's a great memory.
Yeah.
Now, when he worked at the Dew Line, most of your family
Yeah.
was back east, right?
Right. He retired and he came to Alaska to make some money, you know, and we were going to follow him. That, you know, when he got settled, but he came up in May of '65 back to Alaska, and he went to work on the Dew Line.
Mm. And of course, that was an important project back then.
Yeah, I think it was. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of
Because
people.
The Cold War, it
Yeah.
was the early warning system.
Yeah.
Now, back in Maine, did you have extended family back there?
We did, not that much. My dad had an uncle there, a brother there, an uncle. And where we were, in kind of the northern part of Maine or middle part of Maine. And my mother had a brother in the southern part of Maine around Oakland, Waterville, Maine.
Okay.
You know, that's, you know, a few other relatives, but.
Well, tragedy hit your family, though, when you're back east there. Your mom passed away.
Yeah.
Heart attack?
Yeah.
Golly, how old was she?
She's 43 years old.
Ooh. Now, how old were you?
14.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
I don't really talk about it. A lot of people have known me for a long time, and this is probably the first time I've publicly talked about it, you know. But, yeah, that hit us pretty hard.
So your dad had to come back from Alaska and get to the family, right? Yeah. Where did you stay? Did some of those relatives come and help at all? Or?
Well, he got home pretty quick, you know. If you look at a map and look where Maine was and look at the Dew Line, that's a long ways away, you know. He was at Barter Island, Kaktovik, you know, and you know, I don't remember. You know, maybe people came over and took care of us. I can't remember. Sure. I do remember going down to my uncle's house in Waterville, Maine, for a few days. But she passed away September 2nd, 43. 8 kids. So the oldest was 16 and the youngest was 4. So, you know, that had an impact on us. So,
you think?
So, yeah, I think so.
Oh my gosh!
So
yeah, of course.
he came back, and it was like November. Loaded us up in a 1960 Ford Falcon station wagon. That's pretty small station wagon, you know. All of us, yeah, all of us, and drove to Alaska.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Do you have any memories besides the tight quarters on the way?
You know, I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
The only thing I remember on the trip was going across the bridge in Minnesota it was the longest bridge I ever saw, and I must have saw about 10 cars with deer on the top of the cars, you know. You know, it was deer hunting season in November.
Sure.
But we hit North Pole middle of November, right around Thanksgiving.
What was the temperature?
Cold. It was cold back then.
Yeah.
You know, those that have been here, they know it's 56. It was cold in the North Pole. Colder in North Pole than probably anywhere else.
Yeah.
You know, and we had a little house there. It's still there on 6th Avenue. It's like 12, 14 feet wide, maybe 24 feet long.
Oh.
And back then, you know, the road, Richardson went right through North Pole. You had Santa Claus House on one side next to the trading post, Cunningham's trading post. Across the street, you had Jenkins Junkyard, and North Star bar, and a lady lived in a trailer and had a liquor store out of her trailer. You know, used to go up to the kitchen window and cards. I can remember that. But yeah, I worked. I learned to drive a little bit. They used to have tank trails out there, you know, in North Pole. I'd drive on the tank trails. Like my grandson, he's 14. He drives. He's not supposed to, but I was doing the same thing.
On the tank trails?
On the tank trails,
yeah.
You know. So we then, you know, from there, Dad got a job at Clear. So we moved to Clear.
Mm. But not as a large community. So,
No.
Yeah.
They had, when we lived there, we lived at Brown's Court. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Brown's Court. Even people down there nowadays, they don't know where it is. But it was built by Leo Brown. And it was a little trailer court. So we lived in a trailer, probably 55 feet long. Little Wanigan, you know, 10 by maybe 14 by 30. That's where people, you know, didn't have a lot of home builders back then. A lot of people had trailers. They had another big trailer park down there called the Aho. And it was this side of Rex Bridge, right past Clear Sky Lodge. Mm. So.
Where did you go to school?
Well, the kids, you know, there's 8 of us. So Debbie and me and Kathy, my younger one, we took a bus to school to Nenana. They didn't have a school in Healy. In fact, the road didn't even go to Healy. I mean, it went to Healy, but that's as far as it went. And they didn't have a school in Anderson. So the bus would come out where we were. We'd get on the bus and we'd go to Anderson, pick people up, and then go to Nenana. The rest of them went to school right there at Brown's Court. They had a K through 8 school there.
Huh. Well, that's a long bus ride, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 35 miles, you know, one way. You know, when you go through Anderson, then that put another 10 miles on it. But yeah, and so I went to school there.
Yeah, you also played basketball on the team there, right?
Yeah, wasn't as good as Steve, some of them players. Yeah, my mom was. Yeah, I used to. When I was 15. You know, when I started playing ball, I didn't have a driver's license. And so after school, we'd have practice in the Civic Center. I don't know when school got out, maybe 3:30. By the time practice was over, the bus had gone, so I'd hitchhike home, you know, every night. 25 miles a night, I'd hitchhike home.
In cold temperatures.
Yeah, it was cold. It was 40, 50, 60 below back in them days, you know, in the 60s. And people would pick you up back then. Very seldom would somebody go by without picking you up. And but I did that for months, hitchhiking home, till I got 16, and then I stopped doing that.
Well, I'm guessing, you know, with your mom's passing, you had more responsibilities as one of the older members of the kids, right? You're working.
Well, you know, back in them days, working at Clear, that was a pretty darn good job. Still is today, you know. So, I mean, Dad did a good job. But yeah, Debbie and I probably were the oldest. So.
Picking up some of the slack.
A little bit, yeah. I worked, you know, when I was down there, whatever jobs I could do growing up in high school, I worked. Mm-hmm. Worked building log septic systems, tanks for Brown's Court. I worked at Clear.
So glamorous job.
Glamorous job, yeah. I worked at Clear for Pruse. They had a concrete job there. I was 16. I didn't know I'd be a labor commissioner later on, dealing with child labor laws. Then when I was 17, I worked for Peter Kiewit and Sons, you know, at Clear, you know, on a construction job. Mm-hmm. I'd take my dad to work every morning, and I'd watch him work. You know, my dad would say, "You could do that." And I said, "Yeah, I know I could." You know, so a union job. Kiewit, Steve Stevens was the head of Kiewit at the time, and I'd go out there every day. The job started at 7. I'd go out there at 6:30 every morning, You know, after about 2 weeks, they got tired of me. Every morning, they'd say, no work, and I'd go out the next morning. They'd say, no work, I'd go out the next morning. I did that for 2 weeks. And finally, I went to work. So I worked for them all summer, and then I worked for them when I graduated from high school. Worked at the university at the Geophysical Institute. They were building that in the animal lab up here. You know, a lot of construction back in
A lot of construction.
Bill Wood's day.
Yeah,
You know, yeah. So I worked there.
Well, in fact, that first year here at UAF, you were planning. Did you go up to the North Slope at that point?
Yeah, I was actually supposed to go to school that fall.
Yeah.
In '69, and I don't know what I was thinking. I was working for Keywood all summer, and then boom, North Slope hit, and I ended up. That was my first airplane flight on Wien. So at
Your first flight.
Yeah, I went to Prudhoe Bay, North Slope in 1969. I worked for an outfit called Niedermeyer Martin, building ARCO's main camp up there. So I worked there, and then I came back in the fall. I mean,
What was it like up there during those?
nothing like it is today. I mean, there was just nothing there back then. Nothing. They had discovered oil the year before in '68. I remember Ramstead, a company out of Anchorage, was up there, and we were right there where that SAG 1 or whatever the well was, you know. But it was dark and just nothing at the time. And everything was kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Everything was sort of secret, you know. There was no communications between ARCO and BP, you know. It's sort of like everything.
Trade secrets and all that.
Yeah. We lived in a camp, you know, skid camp, and a lot different today, you know. So I sort of had a good introduction to the slope in the beginning, and I spent a lot of time on the slope or with oil industry issues, you know, the rest of my life.
Well, before we get to your studies here, you sort of worked off and on and paid your way through college.
Yeah, I never got any. Well, I shouldn't say I never got a scholarship. I got a $500 scholarship from the Clear Women's Club, you know. And I remember that, you know, $500. But yeah, no, I didn't take any loans that I wasn't gonna, you know, I mean, wanted to go to college. No one in the family went to college, you know, and didn't know what I was doing when I was there, you know, and wasn't quite sure what I was interested in, but, you know, I did in 4 years what most people would do in 2, you know. I'd work a semester, you know, go to school a semester, work a semester, you know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
You know. And then,
Well, and it was a buzz of activity. You talked about building up at the GI area, and so what was campus like when you were here, Jim?
I mean, it's very similar to, I stayed for a while. I mean, I think my first semester I stayed at Moore Hall. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe another semester, then I moved off campus, you know, and lived off campus, but different, you know, smaller, you know, and...
Well, talking to Steve and so many others, one of the great things about going to UAF was the small class size and getting to know your profs. So I'm interested, how did you enter police administration?
I don't have a clue, to be honest. I mean, I don't have a clue. I took classes, you know, at night, you know. Mm-hmm. Lloyd Hopner was a professor. Took, you know, criminal law, civil law, business law. The dean, I can't think of his name, of students, he taught constitutional law. But I just enjoyed.
Did you ever think of going into law because
No.
you took so many? Yeah.
No, never
And
thought
so
about
one
it.
day it dawns on you, gee, if I just take a couple more.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. But, you know, later on I got a BA degree in labor studies, you know. But no, I was really working and going to school, and I enjoyed school. Had a lot of friends here at the university. Wasn't, you know, active in student politics, you know, like some of the students were back in them days, you know, like
Sure.
Brian Rogers. He was a, you know, what do you call it? Back in them days during the war, you know, Vietnam War, they were all protesting, you know. Back where I was growing up, I mean, we didn't have TV. If we did get TV, it was 2 weeks, you know, we'd see something 2 weeks later, or didn't get a newspaper, and that was kind of rule in my days, you know. You didn't have a bridge, you had to take the ferry across the Tanana, you know, and then in the winter, the ice road. And I remember going out to Two Rivers. Anybody here from Two Rivers? And one time they asked me, "Where are you from? Where do you live?" I said, "Well, I live on 2 Mile Bennett Road." "Oh, but we're from rural Alaska here. You don't have a clue what it is out here. You know, you city." All I could think about was hitchhiking home at 40, 50 below, and somebody telling me that 17 Mile is rural. You know, Two Rivers. So, you know, anyways, that was.
Well, when you get your associate degree, you don't do police administration.
No.
You went into labor.
Well, you know, I was working, and then, you know, in '73, I met my wife, and when I started working, you know, that's when the haul road started going. So I was up working for Morrison Knudsen on the haul road at Tulik. And then I was trying to come in, you know, closer to town. And I ended up, Modern called me, and I worked for Modern at Livengood. We built Livengood Camp. I was running a crew up there. And then I come back a little bit, and I ended up working for Bannister, Joyce, Leonard. They were double jointing the pipeline, you know, here in town at the old Earth Movers, H&S Earth Movers site, where Bentley Mall is today or something. And, you know, there's thousands of people. It was just crazy, and they needed people to come to work at the hall. So John Orbeck called me up and said, "Hey, would you be willing to come in?" So I went to work, and I worked there 10 years, 10, 12 years, representing laborers and negotiating contracts and flying the dew line where my dad used to work, and
Really?
taking care of clear negotiations where he used to work, and dealing with the city of Fairbanks, you know.
What was that like, Jim? I mean, here you have these connections, and you're fresh out of college,
Yeah.
and you're...
Well, it was a blur to me. You know, if you go and you look back, you know, I mean, from probably '75, I went to work in the office in 1975. And that 3 years was I mean, I look, you know, there's thousands of people. There's some here, a couple in the room here that came up during the pipeline, like a blur. I mean, it was just, you know, 724s dealing with hands working, coming, going, putting people to work, and, you know, going up and down, spending time on the slope.
Well, it was a pretty wild time.
It was a wild time.
Yeah.
You know, the only good thing probably is I didn't spend a lot of time on 2nd Avenue and, you know, bars. I was
Noted.
married at the time. Still am, but I mean, we just didn't spend a lot of time there, you know. But yeah, it was different day.
Yeah.
So, and I spent a lot of time representing hands in rural Alaska, so I'd spend time in Galena and Ruby and Fort Yukon and Nome and Kotzebue. So I moved around the state a lot, the northern part of the state, not so much, you know, from Fairbanks on up, you know, or Healy on up. I didn't spend a lot of time in Southeast or South Central, but so I met a lot of people.
No, I bet you
know,
did, yeah.
Dealt with a lot of contractors.
You know, I'm going to set the stage because, of course, as I mentioned, you're president of the AFL-CIO for the state years going forward, and labor commissioners. Can you paint sort of for us a sort of a broad brush landscape of what labor was like and how it's changed over the years from that time when you're out of college and you're representing this crazy period with all these laborers to president of the AFL-CIO and so on?
Well, I mean, there's changes. There's no question about it. If you go back and you look at labor in 1975, you know, who the leadership was back in those days, you know, probably the one that comes to mind for a lot of people is Jess Carr and the Teamsters. They were probably the dominant group here. That certainly changed, you know, over the last number of years. It's different today. It's kind of interesting. You say that, you know, my focus was mostly in the construction industry. You know, I did represent public employees, but mostly in the construction industry. So that's sort of my background. And as far as AFL-CIO, it's, I don't know if there's a lot of changes between back then and today. When you're president of the AFL-CIO, your focus is really more on legislative issues than the political issues. When I was working for the laborers, my focus wasn't legislative or political.
Right.
It was representing people on the job. It's a little different today, I think, and I'm not quite sure why it is. And if you'd asked me this question 5-6 years ago, I may have given you a different answer. But today, for an example, I think it's hard now. I don't know what it is. Back when I was there, the hall was filled with people, hundreds and hundreds of people looking for work. People coming from all over rural Alaska, villages coming in looking for work. We represented a lot of Native members back in them days. There was more people looking for work than there were jobs, you know, if you go back over a period of time. Nowadays, it seems opposite to me. What I'm hearing from people in labor and contractors, it's hard to get people. They've got jobs they can't fill right now. And I think it's going to be a problem going forward, trying to get people qualified people to come up or develop qualified people here to man up these projects that we're going to have, you know. And if we get a big inch pipeline or something, we're going to be in real trouble here. But even with the infrastructure money coming in, as they say, and I don't keep up with that much, to be honest with you. I don't know what's coming, just listening to people say there's a couple $1 billion worth of projects, and that money's throughout the country. Now we're competing with people from, you know, all these states are going to have projects. So it's going to be hard to, I think you're going to see a big difference here going forward. It's going to be hard to get people to man up these projects, I think, going forward. That's kind of what I see happening here, not just here, but in other parts of the country as well. You know, that's what I see or feel.
Well, of course, public service is another important aspect of your history. Tell me how you ended up labor commissioner.
You know, that's another one that's beyond me. You know,
So you don't remember?
No, you know, it's. You know, I was actually supporting somebody else. You know, when I was working construction, going to the university, I wasn't looking to go to work in labor. I was called, and I thought, well, it's an opportunity. And the same way as commissioner, Steve Cooper, he got elected, and I supported him. Him and I weren't good friends. I mean, we met each other. I really didn't know Steve. He knew a lot of university people. You know, Patty Kostelik was his gatekeeper, you know, there. Sheila Goddard, Dean Goddard, some of those kinds of people. But I don't really know why he reached out, and I.
But he really wanted you.
Well, you know, I mean, There were other people just as qualified or more qualified than I was, actually. I mean, I might have been in the second tier in my view because I knew people around the state that had a lot of experience. I had no experience in Juneau. I mean, when I was a union representative for 10 years, I never went to Juneau. That wasn't my thing. So I didn't know my way around down there, didn't know my way around politically, legislatively. But I asked him to look at a couple other people that I thought were good, and I remember Sheila Goddard called and said, I call him governor. She said, Steve, he's not going to have any, he wants you to come down. So I went down there, and it was a great job. I had a good experience, and
well, let me.
Some of the legislators were a little tough to deal with, probably,
We'll get to that in a minute, but
some of my friends.
So when you get to Juneau, though, it's a big difference. And did you pack up and just move everybody?
No, we rented our house, and Beth and the two kids went to Juneau, and we were there 4 years. They'd come back in the summers, and I would stay in Juneau. But yeah, it was a great. I mean, I enjoyed the job. I had good people, good staff. Learned a lot. When I was there, we had. If you remember the time, I mean, we had more out migration than in migration.
Right, I was going to say.
We had high unemployment. Mm-hmm. We had more REOs. I mean, we owned thousands of homes. People just threw their keys on the table and left. Banks were going under. Oil was under $10. So, it was a tough time for a lot of people.
Sure was.
A lot of construction hands that I used to represent were hurting, and so it was. Our focus was, it's all about jobs, jobs, getting people to work, trying to get, work for people. That was my focus.
Well, on top of all that, then, of course, the Exxon Valdez occurred.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that was a mess.
In more ways than one.
Yeah, I mean, put a lot of people to work. I remember I flew in on a guard helicopter with Governor Cooper and Chief of Staff and into Cordova. And you want to see a sight to see, go into a 400-person meeting of fishermen in Cordova, They were not happy, And I remember flying into Valdez a week after the spill, and they had about I can't remember, a mile from Valdez. There must have been 200 campers. A lot of them from Fairbanks. A lot of them I knew were heading to work, in Valdez. But it was devastating to the country, to the state, from Prince William Sound all the way to Kodiak, and it was frustrating for me because if you go back, they had Coast Guard was kind of in charge, and then they had the Exxon. They're taking the lead for the industry, and then the state had Denny Kelso, Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, good guy, had a great cabinet to serve in, but my responsibility was to try to protect the health and safety of the people that were working on the spill.
Well, we're talking about the pipeline. That was a zoo right there.
The spill is. I mean, when you put
response to the
spill. You put thousands and thousands of people on the shore, trying to clean up a spill. There's thousands and thousands of I used to call them I used to get frustrated and say, I wouldn't say this maybe in Cordova, but, you guys worry about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. I'm worried about people have to go out there and clean it up. So, I'm fighting to get safety people out on out on the spill, and had no help from the federal OSHA people, Only had, 8 or 10, 12 inspectors, statewide. So we shut down offices and we put them out on the spill. But it was not easy to keep everybody, safe out on an oil spill.
Yeah.
When you had no control over transportation, Hard to get a helicopter because they were all out, already got them. And it was hard to get places for people to stay, inspectors, we had to take over a few homes that HFC had. I was on their board at the time and just, said, give me some keys, we're gonna open up this house that people walked away from. I got inspectors that need a place to stay. But, it was a heck of a devastating environmental thing for the state. But I thought the response from Governor Cooper and Kelso and the Coast Guard, I thought it was about the best we could do. I thought they did a good job, really.
Well, after that tumultuous period, after the 4 years in the Cooper administration, you come back to Fairbanks.
Yeah.
Did you ever plan on running for mayor?
No. I never planned to. My whole life, the only thing I ever planned was I wanted to build a training center. But other than that, no, I didn't. I think there's a few people in here, like Gary and others, that talked to me, but there was like 6 or 7 people running. A lot of them had filed after the 1st of January. The election was in October. I ended up announcing like August 3rd. I had a press conference.
Well, it's a large field too of people.
Well, yeah, there's 6 people. I've never run for anything before, and people really didn't know. I had like 35% name recognition, and we did a poll. They did a poll, and I had 35% name. I had the lowest name recognition of anybody in Fairbanks. Harold Gillum had 90. Coghill had 91. Bartos, everybody had, but they didn't know me, so I didn't really have a negative. I had a high positive. So I had 35%. So, and I knew people around the state. So my 4 years in Juneau, you get to meet people from other parts of the state. That opened up a kind of a different world to me, from labor, So Grace Scheibel.
Well, I was going to say Grace Scheibel was the one who really talked you into it, I hear.
Yeah, she called me and I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you chair my campaign, I'll do it. I didn't think she'd say yes. Anyway, so Grace, she's wonderful, and I had 35% name recognition. I'm running against people that's on the assembly, never served in public office. I remember when we had a press conference, and he's a great guy, Curtis Thomas, he was in Channel 11, and he was there. My dad was there, he was still alive then, and he was going out, and Curtis made a comment, and he says, well, he's never gonna win, here it was, 2 months, and we got to be really good friends, Curtis and I, afterwards. I'd run into people I'd never met, and they'd say, oh, you're the one Grace is supporting. I said, that's me. I go to the Pioneers home, Grace Scheibel. Everybody knew Grace Scheibel, and, her reach went far and wide. University, legal community, the fact that she chaired my campaign, that's probably the only reason why, I was even competitive or won, really.
Yeah.
A lot of people in town were a little I think the business community was a little leery about labor guy, you know. But I had some friends in there too, you know, the Harvey Marlins and people like that supported me. I had worked with over the years, so. My whole campaign I remember, you know, I had one commercial that had all the pictures of all the other assembly members running, and I'd say something like, you should vote for me because I'm not on the assembly, you know, or something like that. I can't remember, but, you know, so, hell, I won, and then I ran again and won. So I was, 2 terms, that was enough, you know.
So tell me, did your time in Juneau in any way prepare you for the scale of the borough, and what is the secret to being in public service at that level?
Well, I think it did. There's no way I would ever have thought about. First of all, I didn't know Grace Scheibel. We were both from Fairbanks, but we were in different circles. When
she was in the Cooper administration.
She was, and
yeah.
She was in the cabinet, and I was in the cabinet. So
yeah.
We would spend every week when we were in Juneau, we would meet for lunch. So you know, somebody asked Grace, well, why are you supporting Jim? Well, he was one of the only commissioners that never called up whining about something. You know, she was the attorney general. You know, and. But yeah, just the fact that I had, I can't remember, 700 people working for me, had budget, you know, wasn't the largest state budget by a long ways, you know. I kind of considered myself more in that second tier, you know, of the cabinet, to be honest with you. And I knew my way around. Then I understood legislation. You know, that helped me when I was mayor. You know, I knew who was on the second floor and who was on the third floor in Juneau, and I could, you know, and I just got to know a lot of people. It's a big state, but it's a real small state in a lot of ways. So that helped me, I think, a lot. And you know, I think trying to just work, you know, try to work with, you know, I had very good presiding officers to work with. You know, I had Hank Hove was there for 3 years. So, you know, you got to deal with people, and as long as you don't blindside them and you respect their opinion and, you know, work with them, give them a little credit, you know. Some people, that's real important to them, you know. I want all, you know.
Sure.
But I enjoyed my time, you know, had good staff, good people.
Well, you seem to forge strong relationships. Is there a key element there? And then respecting the sort of legislative, executive divide important at all at that level?
Yeah, I think you need to. I mean, you know, there's some that, I look at it differently. I mean, I don't look at it like, when I was mayor, I wasn't working for board of directors, you know. When I was head of the Pipeline Training Center, I worked for board of directors, and I understood their role and my role. I looked at it differently when I was mayor. I mean, I'm a co-equal branch of the legislative side, the assembly side, and I respect their, you know, can't do much without money, and they appropriate money, and but you know, I kind of looked at it like all I needed 6 votes, you know, to get something passed, and they needed 8 votes to overturn me, and never had that situation happen. Always, you know, I think I worked well with them. I mean, every mayor has 2 or 3 that are a little
Contrary.
goofy, or yeah, a little nuts, you know, maybe some of them. They're way off, you know, not like it is today. I mean, it's tough today. I mean, a lot tougher today than when I was in service. A legislature's a lot different today than when I was in service, public service. But I always had a good, solid group of assembly to work with. And one of the reasons why I think that sometimes is that if you look at the makeup of the local government, at that time there was 11 assembly members. And you compare that with what's at the city, I think there's like 6. So you have an election in the city, it'll swing, you know, every other year it'll swing way to the right or way to the left. When you had 11 on the assembly, it doesn't swing way to the left or way to the right. You know, and in my opinion, you're better off going right down the middle here if you want to be successful in this part of the country. When they reduced it to 9, I think it made it a little tougher, you know. But yeah, you have to respect their role, and you know, don't try to upstage them. Try to bring them in. Try to, you know, get them on board here, you know. And if you're going to do something controversial, you know, you don't need to blindside them, you know. And but today is different. I mean, that was 30 years ago. You know, that's how long it's been.
Yeah.
You know, people can remember my tenure. They're dating themselves, in my opinion.
Well, something Steve Frank said when I interviewed him is often social media today dominates, and people in public office will play sometimes to the extreme to capture that social media attention. Yeah. That didn't occur.
We didn't have that. We didn't have that. Yeah.
And it also strikes me that, especially in the borough, maybe it's true with city too, but there are bread and butter issues. There are solid and solid waste, as it comes to mind. Solid issues that have to be done and have a lasting value. They don't grab headlines. They're not sexy in any way, but they're important for governance.
Yeah, and I think actually, you know, and I haven't followed the borough for a long time. I mean, to be honest with you, I served my time, and I think they have a better maintenance program. I mean, I think they have some project fund for maintenance that they allocate by ordinance every year, something we didn't have, you know, back then. But yeah, you have to invest in what you have, you know, and you know, so yeah, we
You forged the solid waste
well,
disposal?
yeah, I mean, when I came in, there was an assembly, had a committee, and you know, and they were just ready to give it to anybody but them, you know, and so I had Nadine Winters, who did a great job. Sandra Stringer came in, and they put that together, and you know, we brought up enough revenue, bring enough revenue from the solid waste taxing jurisdiction to pay for that. So yeah, they're still using that same solid waste plan today, 30 years later. And but that, you know, people back in those days, people like schools, you know, and
sure,
you know, and you know, we did pretty well when we had Steve Frank as the finance chair from Fairbanks. He was helpful, and Gary was co-chair of finance. He, you know, people that knew Fairbanks, and you know, I had you know, had some good legislators to work with, you know, back in them days. It's different. I think Steve's right. The social media that it started, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and it's getting worse and worse today. I can see it. You see it on the national level, what's going on. You see it in Juneau, what's going on. Yeah, you know, I see it here in Fairbanks, what's going on. I don't think it's healthy, personally, you know.
Of course not, yeah. Well, one other thing before we get you to the Pipeline Training Center. One thing that starts in your administration, and as you pointed out when we talked or exchanged emails before, was the valuation of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the TAPS. And that turned out to be an important thing for the borough, and it finally got litigated, and the borough prevailed.
Yeah. Probably more important today than it was then, but it was important then, and that was sort of on my way out the door. And I spent a little time on the pipeline. Went up and down that pipeline a million times, days and nights, crews, working. So I'm kind of familiar with the project. So when they come in and say it's worth $800 million or something, when it's costs 6, 7, 8 billion to build, the state assessor took care of that. And
so what the deal was is they devalued it,
right,
so that the revenues coming into
right,
the borough for
that's right.
It's
and
yeah.
we all the infrastructure of the line from the boundaries of the borough coming in and going out toward anything in here. And I tried once to annex Pump Station 7, but my friend Johnny Binkley, he was in the legislature. He didn't agree with that. But there's not much left at Pump 7 now. But yeah, and I think a lot of that is the credit really goes to those that came after me. I think when that litigation finally hit, I'm not sure, it might have been Luke or Carl, or Whitaker was probably right in the middle of that when he was mayor. I think the legal office did a good job. They hired some outside counsel that did a good job. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we're going to tax residents like you and I for the value of the home. We should tax them the same way. So I think I don't know what it is now, but it's a heck of a lot better than it was when I was there.
Sure.
Well,
it had lasting value. And speaking of, you said the only thing you ever really planned for was this training center, this pipeline training center. When you leave as borough mayor, you take a short break, and then you have your work with the AFL-CIO, and then you really spearhead this training center. Why? Why was that important to you, Jim?
Well, if you go back and look at my history, when I started, and I come out of the construction industry, I spent a lot of time on pipeline projects, not just the main line, but the pump stations and the slope from the beginning till probably 90 when I became mayor. My last trip as labor commissioner was a tour of the line all the way up to, from Valdez all the way up, and spent a couple days on the slope. Came down. I remember coming to Juneau. So I have a history with oil and gas, and even after that, even after I was mayor, I was involved on big gas line projects. Every governor has their own, going to build a, pipeline. Knowles, it was my way, the highway, and there's been half a dozen of them,
I'm waiting for that gas pipeline.
Yeah, well, you might see tankers in Prudhoe or Costview loading up before you see a pipeline. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, in rural Alaska, I wanted a facility. The construction guys, they have federally registered apprenticeship programs. They're very successful. They've got a lot of money in it. They produce a lot of people. But I wanted to do something different. I wanted kind of a multi-employer, multi-union program, and I wanted to build something that could provide opportunities for people to get trained up, in case we have another big project, train up for the oil and gas industry, and also be available to rural people from all over the state. And so that was our effort to do that. I had, I can't remember, there's like 6 employers. All the pipeline companies, are on the board. Labor's represented on the board. We have, when I left, we had strong relationships with the university for their CTC program. Relationships with school district. We bring in high school kids and teach them. We'd bring in crews from, we'd bring in people from, let's say, Kossibu would bring in 12, 15 people from Kossibu. Would bring in an elder, a native elder with that crew. And we have a project in Kossibu. We'd work with a contractor, would try to train up, enough people. We brought people in from the YK. We have a camp, a nice facility there, kitchen and camp. So we brought in, so it's sort of, let's provide opportunities for people in rural Alaska. You live in Ruby or Tetlin or wherever, Galena, Fort Yukon. You don't know a lot of these opportunities. When you're out there, you don't know what's available. Most of these programs are in urban Alaska, So, I want to have a program where you can bring people in, Alaskans in, and train them up. If we have a big project, we're going to have a hard time. People say, oh, we love what you're doing, Jim, because when you get done, everybody's going to, we're going to be able to, it's going to be so much work that we're going to have a hard time, in my opinion, manning up this work. But yeah, that's something that, that'll go long after I'm gone, provide opportunities for, I hope, a lot of Alaskans. They have programs over there where military comes in as the last 6 months, or they have a helmets to hard hats where we're bringing in military folks from Wainwright or Alson or wherever, putting them through 18-week welding classes and getting them in programs so they can go to work. So it's got a lot of potential, I think, to provide opportunities for people that we didn't have before.
Right. It's. I'm going to ask you finally to kind of gaze into a crystal ball about labor's future here. We always are somewhat, lag behind the lower 48, and because of the size and nature of our state, there are always important labor jobs that will need filling. I sometimes hear about automation and AI and things, probably not relevant here, but what do you see going forward for Alaska labor?
It really depends on what opportunities we have to develop our state. I believe we can develop our state in the right way. If our resource development opportunities are shut down, we're all gonna have a hard time. Labor's gonna have a hard time. Just the halting in this NPRA going west here. I think the Willow Project, something, put hundreds of people out of work here in the last year. So, I'm not saying every project, should be permitted, but I think we need to support opportunities for our kids and our grandkids to go to work here. And if you shut her down, we're going to be out of work. So I think, again, my background is construction, and we have projects that can be developed in an environmental conscious way. I think we need to move on them. I don't. Being in the university, there's some that, like, I'm an ANWR guy. I've always wanted to develop ANWR. I'm a guy that wants to develop NPRA. I want to. So, if we shut her down, we're, going to be no work. No work for anybody, labor or not. So, I think a lot depends on, what we're doing here in the state, because that's, we got fisheries, tourism, and resource development, in my view, the big,
Those are the big three.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
kind of how I look at it.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking
Yeah.
time and talking with me this evening. And I think we have a few people in the audience who might want to ask some questions of you too. But please,
I don't see any hands.
well, they're coming. Well,
Yeah.
there's one right there.
Yeah. Where, oh.
Jim, was under your mayorship, was that when the dumpster sites came into being?
No.
Okay, because this is being videotaped, I'm going to repeat that. And so, when did dumpster sites come into the boroughs?
They were here when I got here, but one of my first projects was to redo them, you know. Like, we built Farmers Loop East, we built Farmers Loop West. We built a lot of the sites. Built one out at, I don't know the name of it, out at back gate of Wainwright there. We were looking at some property and military, worked out a deal with the military. Colonel Brophy was a commander out there, and there was somebody out there that had his whole junkyard on military land, and you know, they weren't going to let us build the site. And when Colonel Brophy brought out a platoon of soldiers or something, it got corrected real quick. So that one out there, we built most of the new ones. Fox, you know, we did. Now I think the last few years they've done some improvements, but back then, you know, that was important to me. That's what people saw, you know, and the dumpsters were really, really bad, you know, in the late 80s. So,
Great idea.
yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, that, you know, people wanted better places, and we bought them all. You know, we bought them all. We were renting sites, I think, at that time, so we didn't want to rent anything. We wanted to purchase and build them. And there's been improvements since I was mayor, of course, I think. And, so yeah, that's my claim to fame is dumpster sites. You know. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, see? That was not too bad. Uh-oh, there's Linda's grandson. How are you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So from what you described, back when you were working, people going to work seem to be trying to find more careers and long-lasting jobs at that. From what you described, is that kind of how you see it, like back then?
Were
So
they
hold on, let me just repeat.
No,
So the gentleman asked whether there were people were looking for long-term, many-year occupations, jobs when they were. Is that right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking for that. Construction's a little bit different, you know, but even in the construction industry, those guys are looking for long-term employment, you know. They stay with one or two contractors or, but, you know, there are long-term opportunities, but you see those more in university, public sector, you know, the state or city, hospital. You know, we have a big hospital group here. So, but yeah, I think they're looking for all the construction guys that I know, and gals. I shouldn't be careful what I say here. Everybody's looking for long-term employment to provide for their families.
That was actually half of the question.
Oh.
Yeah. So, from what I've heard in the modern day, especially for younger generations, the younger people getting into the workforce, they're looking more for temporary jobs and sort of going through and not necessarily looking as much for a long-lasting career. What's your take on what is causing that sort of monumental shift?
You know, I don't have an answer for that. I think you might be right there. I don't know if that's something that we're seeing in the last couple of years due to COVID or what's going on in the workforce. I've been out of that for 5-6 years, so I don't keep track of that. But I don't look at those statistics, whether it's. But there is a changing in the workforce. I can feel it. I can see it. I just don't have an answer of why that's happening. Something's happening in how people look at work or look at their future. Because I can tell you that those that I know in the construction industry, they're having a hard time getting people, getting harder and harder. You know, it's so bad that they're even looking at some of these retirees and trying to get them to go back to work. You know, George, some of the, you know. But there is something happening. I just don't know what it is. You know.
I have a question. If my memory serves me correctly, there was a school bond issue that failed twice when the school district was running the campaign.
Yeah.
And as I recall, you said stay out of it, and you ran it the third time and you got it passed. How did you do it?
So let me just quickly summarize. A school bond initiative failed twice, but you took it over and it seemed to work that time.
I got to see if there's any school board members here. You know, that, you know, this, we had some pretty strong school boards back in, you know, when I was mayor, and that was good. You know, I take a little pride. I supported schools and education, I think, if you go back and look at my record. But we had some really good, very competent school board people back then. Pretty independent, pretty stubborn, some of them. And yeah, they put a package together. It's like $100 million. They put a package together, and it went out and it failed, you know. They put a package together and it went out and failed again, you know. And then they came across the street, you know, said, hey, do you have an opinion, Jim? You know, I said, yeah, I probably do. And, you know, that was my first project when I was mayor, is that to get the assembly to approve the money to build that school district building. You know, they were at Maine and it was, but anyways. And, you know, I met with them and stuff. And, yeah, we structured it a little bit different, you know, and, you know, you gotta, it's all about votes. You gotta get a certain amount of votes, you know, and we kind of made sure that, you know, everybody to the extent we could, you know, everybody had an opportunity to get something or to buy in or make it feel their own bond issue. There's a lot of people, you know, whether it's Two Rivers or Salcha or something, you know, why should I vote for this? There's nothing in there for me, you know. So we put it together, and I actually reached out to Judy and Johnny Binkley and said, hey, why don't you come over and chair this, you know? And they came, Judy did most of the work, I might say, you know. Johnny came along. But put a public face on it, and went out and sold it to the, you know, had to go out and talk to the people in Two Rivers, go out in Salcha, talk to the people there, go out on Badger and hit some of them schools. And, but yeah, I don't know what it passed by, 54, 55%, I don't know, but it didn't fail, you know. And back then, it's important because I think that was 80-20, you know, or 70-30 at least, you know. Debt bond, you know, school bond, you know, you don't want to leave that money aside, you know. Now, since those days, some of those legislators, you know, or governors, I'll say, without getting into names, they won't even fund the school bond debt reimbursement. You know, that was an agreement that was made, and the legislature made it, and now we have governors that say, well, we don't care what agreement you had, so we're not going to reimburse you anything, you know. So now this year I think they did, but the last year or two they, you know, and that put tremendous pressure, down pressure on school boards and school districts. But yeah, we had a lot of help. It just wasn't me. We put a group together and brought some more people in, and I think that, you know, the school district got 85-90% of what they wanted, you know. but, got to get the votes, So, you got a good memory. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, Jim, you mentioned that politics have changed, which is probably a euphemism. A lot of times now it's caricatures with beyond reason. The people have the perception that the money in the state is loyal. That has been true for many years. It's a permanent fund. And the 6 years of Director Angela Waddell defied all records on the permanent fund.
Yeah.
And she was summarily thrown away
Yeah.
with no explanation.
Yeah.
What's going on, and what effect will that have on us?
Yeah, I'm not right in the middle of that, Paulo, but clearly in my view, and I've never met Angela Rodell, but I think the record shows that she under her tenure as director of the fund, it's grown 50% or more, and biggest success for the fund, and that's not all on her too, but I mean, for her to be dismissed.
And we should mention you were a trustee at one time.
I was a trustee for 5 years, chaired it my last year. Steve Frank took my place, and the people I've known, they always say, what improvement he was after you left, Jim. But yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna, clearly in my view, don't know her, but is there something going on there? Yes. Is it politically driven? In my opinion, no question about it. And it comes from the third floor, no question in my mind. You don't have, 6 trustees, 2 of them are commissioners under the law. You don't fire a director in the third floor not know anything about it, okay? If they didn't know anything about it, there'd be a whole bunch of new trustees probably. But yeah, it's politically driven, and I think that's bad for the fund. I didn't experience that, and I guess whether we ever find out for sure, I don't know. There's some investigation. Don't know anything about it, but as a former trustee, I sit back and say, something ain't right here, and but that was years ago, and I was listening to Steve's comment, and I happen to agree with him, and some people disagree, but I think when you I don't know where it came, but when you start investing, and this state's a small state, I mean, when you start making those investments in the state, you need to be far away from that, and we'll see how it does there. There's a lot of politics, and hopefully any money we have invested in the state is appropriately invested and not tied to any politics. So I don't know, but yeah, and the fact is that that's been months ago, and we still do not have I don't think we have a director of the permanent fund, and but yeah, I think a lot of former trustees are somewhat concerned about that. I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
So.
One more question.
How do you stay involved with the community?
How do you stay
Well,
involved with the community?
Michelle got me into this, called me, and I'm not really active. I don't think I am really that active. I don't sit on any boards, I used to sit on the hospital board, I sit on Denali Commission. I'm kind of looking for people in their 30s and 40s, that new generation. I've had people ask me, but I've kind of tried to say, hey, I think it's time to get some new younger people in here to be making these decisions, and I'm fine doing that. You know, I got grandkids, so I watch hockey games and soccer games and volleyball games and swimming is my most enjoyable thing. I got 2 hockey players here today, so, but yeah, I'm busy doing that, you know.
Well, please help me in thanking Jim Sampson for being our guest tonight.